And even I, in the Lloydsbank Masters years ago, I beat, a 24-20 Murugan with this similar kind of, battering ram concepts. Once you rip open these lines, doesn't matter what the opponent's rating is, their king safety is critical. They're going to lose to you because, once you win the king, that's it. So it doesn't matter if they're positionally a much stronger player than you. You go for their king, and you can beat them. People are beatable. So, especially, this nice manoeuvre did actually provoke this d5 perhaps, so unleashing that bishop. So if black hadn't done d5 here, there's some better moves apparently here, like d6, but it's still quite dangerous. e5 here is very dangerous apparently. So h6, and white has a big advantage here in this position. So here, if king g8, this kind of variation is looking extremely terminal for the black king. But the way that Morozevich played it was a quick way to lose, just playing for d5. So that bishop really came out quite lethally after ed and then h6. The other thing to consider, g6, bishop takes g6, and in this kind of variation here, now this queen g7 is critical here for winning on the spot. That's the key move in this position, queen g7. So if rook takes hg, king g8, rook h8, and look at that poor rook on f8. So queening, taking it, it's completely crushing now. Bishop c5 is apparently a mate in 8. So the g6 defense, which in theory keeps everything closed, is pretty hopeless as well, because in this position, even with the h pawn on h6, queen g7, that's beautiful. There are some further technical points I want to make about the game, and I think I basically haven't placed enough emphasis on why black played the way he did. One of the reasons I think Morozevich played for f5, for example, is he really wanted this bishop to play an active role later on this diagonal, because when white especially plays b3, white's weakening the dark squares in his king position. So this idea was really demonstrated in Kasparov's last game in his career against Adams. Adams was white in the English attack, and Kasparov basically played something like f5 and got the bishop to f6, and it was really crushing on the diagonal. So maybe part of Morozevich's strategy was this provocation, not minding his king on the king side, because he thought he'd have enough dark square counterplay. So if we have a look just again and see that particular feature of this. So queen g2 also, I should note, basically it's just targeting the black king in itself, as it turns out, with potential for white to play bishop takes g6 later with the queen useful on the g file. So it's not just the ability to go to h2 and h3. But let's look closely now. This b4, the knight was on the rim, and if white has to play b3, he's weakening these dark squares. So this is something to bear in mind with this English attack system. So black's playing this f5. He's removing this g pawn on g5, which means the f6 square is becoming available to the black bishop. So let's combine that with this knight on the rim having to play b3. You're weakening your dark squares here. So in a way, there's a deep logic behind Morozevich's provocation strategy. But as in other games in the tournament, it seems his provocation has backfired, where white has been, or his opponents have been exceptionally resourceful in taking the opportunity that he's given with his provocation, but without any of the downside. So here, it seems that after this b3, so white did weaken this dark square in particular, and the knight able to go to e8, protecting g7, at the same time putting some pressure on f3. But at the other point, this bishop now free to go to f6. So b2 is becoming critical. But it just seems white just gave time so to stop the combination of queen c3 ever occurring. So that queen on c3 coordinating with the bishop. so White's dark squares weren't exposed, and that's part of the reason I think Morozevich wanted to lift this blockade. That was just an unfortunate side effect, lifting this thing, because what he really wanted to do was to be able to play Queen C3. But as it turned out, after this knight takes, he's one move away from Queen C3, which would be nearly all over. But there's Bishop C1, I suppose. But after knight C4, D5 is trying to clear that knight away so he can play Queen C3 next. And here, it would be all over. If say knight B2, then Queen C3 and an advantage to black. Bishop C1. Well, not quite all over, but this is one of the counter-attacking plans that maybe Morozevich was thinking about. Here, Rybka does give advantage to black now in this kind of variation, Queen E5. So black's played on his trumps that this diagonal is going to be useful. So that's from the black point of view, something to be aware of. But his opponent just basically sidestepped this black counterplay with these tactical resources were in particular. I think the closed variation was underestimated by Morozevich. So this idea that he couldn't play G6, unfortunately, because in this position, this ridiculous tactic after King H8, this computer-like tactic here of Queen G7 just finishes off the game. But actually, Rybka's even more critical that there's other ways to win here. It's quite fascinating now. Knight E5 apparently is winning as well. So why, you might ask? So bishop takes E5. Again, there's the Queen G7 though. So it's that same thing of ripping open this H file for the rook to be able to come on H8, and that pawn on G7. It's really a crushing thing. But also, more ridiculously, Knight A5 is apparently winning as well. So if Queen D6, it's the same basic idea. In all these variations Rybka's showing, it's this basic idea of Queen G7. So it shows again that tactics come to the rescue of strategy, or refute completely the opponent's strategy. So in this case, black was trying to get onto the dark squares, and the knight on the rim meant that white would have to play B3 later, weakening those dark squares. The pawn on G5, once it was exchanged off, gave the opportunity later for the bishop to come to F6. It just didn't work out. So Morozevich is having a bad tournament at the moment, but we'll cover his wins as they occur, and I think he did win in the last round. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.